Hi again, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, a DevOps Playbook at DraftKings built with New Relic and AWS. I'm Kevin Cochran, Partner Solutions Architect at AWS. Today I have with me Abner Germano from New Relic and Mark D'Antonio from DraftKings. We are going to talk about DevOps, basically an overview of DevOps and AWS. We're going to address building, deploying, and scaling DevOps practices. We definitely want to hear from DraftKings about their DevOps practices and transformation. And then after that, we'll have some time for questions. Main takeaways from today's presentations is starting off with improving your dev cycles using real-time application and AWS monitoring using New Relic. I want to help you understand establishing deeper instrumentation across all of your systems, as well as using infrastructure as code to manage your infrastructure. And more importantly, we want to help you understand how to create a rich customer experience. Again, I'm Kevin Cochran. I'm a partner solutions architect here at AWS. Been a software engineer for about 23 years, and I started back in the early days of web development where we did live updates on prod and live dates on prod data. Not ideal, but that's what we did. There were fast fixes, but you had to deal with the occasional catastrophe. And that's when we started seeing some of the traditional desktop, uh, I guess, desktop development processes take over. But they didn't really work and they didn't really evolve either. So they're becoming more obsolete these days. Why? Well, as opposed to back then, today we have a single point of execution. Back then, the traditional development processes really address more deploying to desktops, individuals launching an application on their desktop. But we don't do that today. We have a lot of web applications where you make one update and all of your customers can see it immediately. Business is now driven more by software than ever before. Software has made it easier than ever for customers to interact with businesses, including segments we never thought would integrate into the digital age. If we want to remain on the cutting edge, we have to observe how our customers interact with us through our software. Our customers, whether internal or external, expect applications to be stable, and they're getting more and more used to features and enhancements added on a continual basis. They're not looking for the next version anymore and wondering when they should upgrade. They just expect it for it to be done for them. For this to happen, IT resources need to be able to provision quickly and without formal processes. And better yet, why don't we just let the developers provision what they need when they need it? By removing these types of constraints around developing software, organizations can get back the time that they need in order to innovate and keep their customers not just using their software, but keeping them excited about using it. DevOps combines the components of software development, and software builds with some of the parts of operations, meaning your dev team has control over when the software is released, where it's put, and they wear the pager. Sorry, let me back up here. There we go. They wear the pager. This process not only increases velocity, but it also increases quality. Your developers really don't want to get the 2 a.m. call if they can prevent it. So now they can monitor the software for defects, performance, trends, things like that, which allows them for better planning and continuous development. And the cycle continues, producing better software at faster paces. The drive to use DevOps practices comes from some shared interests between business teams and developing teams. Generally, your product teams want to be more agile with their business decisions and meet the customer's needs more quickly, while your developers would love to have more innovation time. And to achieve this, both of these groups strive for greater stability and security. That's less time dealing with problems and more time working on keeping your customers happy. On the same token, you gain much better use of your time. Less time is spent on development cycles, releases, failures, recoveries, things like that. And then you'll find that your operational overhead is lower because you're making better use of your resources. We're going to find out here from Abner and Mark in just a few minutes. The companies like DraftKings are able to show some pretty impressive advancements in their delivery cycle using the DevOps model. DevOps definitely is not just a trend these days, it's actually the next phase in the evolution of business and software development. Where AWS is concerned, we do offer some on-demand tools to help enable common DevOps practices. So let's just go ahead and walk through a few of these main categories. So let's start with infrastructure as code. If you're not already familiar with the concept of infrastructure as code, a simplified definition is a way to ensure your instances and environment are built out the same way every single time. This makes your environment predictable, controlled, and trackable. Software like OpsWorks and EC2 System Manager are available right in the AWS console. You can manage things like compute resources, storage, networking, and you can apply changes to either a single instance or groups of instances. DraftKings actually uses a combination of tools, not just a single one. So they use things like Terraform and Chef and even have some other Python scripts as well. Our next category is microservices. This is a kind of a fairly important piece of the DevOps model. They're smaller units of your application which run on their own and serve a single purpose or a function. And this means your code base is much more manageable and failures can be isolated and rolled back much quicker. There's a number of ways to implement microservices, and probably the most familiar way, and this is the method that DraftKings uses, is using just EC2 instances on a standard application server. This is kind of a very portable model which you can use just about anywhere. It also gives you the greatest flexibility and the greatest control. Other methods, you can use containers, or you can combine services like AWS API Gateway and AWS Lambda, which further reduces infrastructure management. Arguably, the most important aspect of DevOps is logging and monitoring. When you use advanced tooling like New Relic, you're able to see exactly how your software is being used, how it's performing, and can actually gather data to extend your roadmap. Basically, logging and monitoring gives you the insights you need to keep your customers happy. Continuous integration and continuous delivery, or CI/CD, is kind of the nuts and bolts of a delivery of a DevOps operation environment. It's the workflow which takes your code, moves it through build and test, and delivers it to its destination. CI/CD tools like Jenkins give you very customizable workflows called build pipelines. AWS also has some code services which allow you to build cloud native build pipelines and direct integration between AWS resources. So whether you're just getting started on a DevOps team or you're a seasoned practitioner, AWS makes DevOps in the cloud pretty simple to work with. Not only do you have compute visibility to all of your resources, but you also pay for only what you use. So you can scale, you can automate, you can improve your customer experience without worrying about infrastructure. So when we're talking about the AWS shared responsibility model, we're responsible for the security of the cloud itself. The customer is responsible for securing what they put into the cloud. So our APM partners do play a significant role in helping our customers meet their needs. AWS also holds a number of certifications for programs like FedRAMP, Department of Defense, ITAR, HIPAA, excuse me, and many others. And this, again, helps you with the foundation for your application, so you don't have to worry about what's underneath the hood. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton over to Abner to tell us a little bit about New Relic. Abner?
Thanks, Kevin. So if you don't know about New Relic, we have been helping people with their applications on AWS for a long time. We were founded about 10 years ago, and we now help over 16,000 customers with their applications be successful. We'll talk a lot more about what that means. Just to give you an idea, we serve the brands that you interact with on a daily basis. Many of you have probably used New Relic in some way, shape, or form at some point. And we tend to serve both the strategic digital initiatives and digital transformation initiatives in very large companies, as well as the up-and-comers that you can see there. So, and a very large percentage of our customer base runs applications on AWS. So they report about 45% of all the applications that we monitor report in from AWS. And we operate at very large scale. So you can see there, we currently ingest, it's actually closer to 1.7 billion events and metrics per minute, which makes us one of the largest ingest sites on the internet today, roughly 2,000 times larger than Twitter, if you're counting, and I do. So let's talk about DevOps and where we go there. I talked a little bit about AWS and New Relic in terms of the number of applications that New Relic helps people monitor and understand. But our relationship with AWS goes quite a bit farther than that. We've done a number of different competency certifications with AWS, and you can see some of those there. But the piece that you probably care more about is the way that we've integrated our products with AWS. So if you're running AWS services and you're running applications on AWS, we give you the ability to understand what's going on across all of those. And we do that from everything from the most traditional sort of EC2 as a static server all the way through the most advanced services like Lambda and IoT. And then we extend that partnership even farther into the AWS Marketplace, into APN consulting partners, of which we have relationships with all the best ones, and over 7,000 shared customers. So the big question that comes up when I'm talking to customers of New Relic who are on a DevOps initiative is really twofold. The leadership team always wants to know, hey, how can we go faster? What can I learn from other customers of yours that have gone through a transformation? And even for those who are operating at a fairly fast pace, they always want to know how can they go faster. And one of my best examples of what it takes of a leader to start to rally a team is a CTO from a large sportswear company who said, look, we need to get to a place where we understand what every change that we make, how that change helps us sell more jackets. And so that's the goal that he's given his team, is help us sell more jackets. And in that environment, there are a lot of different ways that you could think about how to go sell more jackets. It might be improve the performance of the website. It might be change the functionality. It might be get people outside more so that they're cold. There are a lot of different ways to go about selling more jackets. But you need to be able to test these. You need to be able to understand what the implications of every change happen to be. And that's where New Relic comes in giving you the visibility to see what's happening inside your environment. As many of you have probably figured out, what you are measuring inside your systems is getting a lot more complex. We used to have a fairly basic web app, which even at multiple tiers and multiple layers, was still fairly complex and hard to instrument and get a handle on. But today that's exploded in terms of the number of different microservices and not only understanding what's happening inside each of those services, but also between those services. And all of this is further exacerbated by the fact that the old notion of if my server's okay, my app is probably fine, is long gone, because now my server that was there 5 minutes ago is gone, and that's on purpose because I don't want to pay for it because I don't have that load right now. And so one of the biggest changes we see in the monitoring market is this move from monitoring things, so monitor a server, monitor a particular component in the system, to monitoring the relationships between all of those different components. This is pretty complex because you have lots of different data sources. So you can put an SDK inside a mobile app, you can put an agent inside a web app like a JavaScript. script, think of like Google Analytics or something like that. You can have synthetic users, so things that ping your site or walk through a particular process. You can embed agents inside the application. You can run an agent inside an infrastructure host, and you can pull metrics out of existing logging and other metrics tools like Amazon CloudWatch. Those are just the data sources that New Relic pulls from. In addition, you have log search and machine data that you're generally sifting through. You have network data that you can find. You have synthetic infrastructure data, so that's like things like Nagios. And then you have social and phone calls and things like healthcare.gov monitoring their system with the intern and CNN and stuff like that. So this results in a fairly complex environment for all of you to sift through. And many of you probably have experience with a number of different monitoring tools that tend to derive from the data source as opposed to try to pull a number of these data sources together. From any of these data sources, you're going to get data out of your data source in one of three types. You could get log data a la Splunk or Sumo Logic, with whom we have some integrations. You can get metrics data, so that's the measurement of an event, things like throughput or error rate. And then you have traces, or the relationships between those events and things that happen. And so, for example, if there's an error, what application components and what infrastructure components were involved in that error and that request. So when we think about companies that are trying to go faster with confidence, we see that there are three big things that you have to be able to do. One is observability, which is a fancy way of saying you need to be able to see all your stuff, and you need to be able to understand how much of what you have can you see and what can't you see. You need to be able to see what changed and why it changed. So every time you make a change, what impact did it have? Did it help you sell more jackets or not? And then you have to have an alignment. I'm sure many of you spend a fair amount of time in conference rooms pointing fingers at each other, either virtually or physically, trying to figure out what a particular problem is or what the team should do next. So let's talk about observability. Can you see, and in many cases, can you alert on what you already have? And when we think about what is it that you have everything from the point where the customer touches your mobile, your web app, through to the application services in the back end, all the way down to the infrastructure services. And being able to understand what's happening at each of those layers, as well as the relationships between those three places, is really incredible. And you have to be able to do that in order to understand all the different changes that are happening. Because the goal of DevOps is to make more changes, to be able to accelerate around that corner, to be able to learn from your customers and your apps. And it's really hard to do that if you can't see all of these different components. And you can see that quote there from REI, who has used New Relic to be able to really change the way that they go about getting people outside. And I should mention that it wasn't actually REI that has the goal of more jackets. It's a different company. So in order to do this, you have to be able to instrument every piece of the puzzle. And you want to be able to do that very quickly. You want to make it easy for your developers and your ops teams to be able to do that instrumentation. And that's one big place where New Relic has historically really excelled, is making that instrumentation task very, very easy. And so you can see there, not only do we make that easy, but you can see all the different, and this is a very short list of different types of components that we can help you instrument. The goal of that instrumentation is to be able to understand the context of the change. So as you move from on-prem to cloud, as you break monoliths apart into microservices, as you make all of these changes as part of your DevOps initiative, the goal is to be able to understand the context of that change. So was that change a good one or a bad one? Did it help serve our business goals? And can we increase that cycle time? And you can see that quote there from Scripps Networks. You may know Scripps, a very large media company. You probably know some of their brands like the Food Network and many others. My kids are addicted to their show Chopped, and they've done a really great job in not only using New Relic to monitor some of their legacy apps, but also to innovate with new services like Lambda. And there's a great interview with them at re:Invent talking about using New Relic for their Lambda environment. So what can New Relic do with this data? Well, if you want to understand the relationships between the various services, those relationships are provided in things like service maps. If you want to understand the relationships between your applications and your underlying infrastructure, that's provided through a thing that we call health maps. And then the thing that we're known sort of traditionally for is inside a particular service, I want to understand the relationship between the code performance and errors inside a particular service. And so that's what transaction traces do. One of the biggest places where we see teams really excelling is in getting common views of their environments. And so the ability to have a dashboard that a CTO can use, that a team can use to be able to understand the relationship between the changes that they make and the business results, that's a place where we've invested very heavily, and enabling you to do things like choose performance parameters and attributes that are very granular to your business. And that's not just like, hey, let's go faster in a certain direction, but let's go faster in a way that actually impacts the business. The other thing that we see is that because we collect all this data, because we have views into all the different environments that our customers use, we can start to apply things like machine learning and applied intelligence to your environment to give you recommendations on things that we think you should be paying attention to. This might be something like a long-running degradation of service. It might be you've got an app that's on a service that's not that's overutilized or underutilized on Amazon or some other environment. So being able to not only give you the tools to explore the data on your own, but also be able to give you the tools to be able to make your team better without them having to be experts in New Relic. One of the frequent questions I get is, what's the difference between New Relic and Amazon CloudWatch? And so if you're familiar with CloudWatch, you know that CloudWatch reports on your consumption of Amazon services. But what you don't get from CloudWatch are things like what's happening inside your server OS or your application that you've built upon. And so that's where New Relic comes in, the ability to not only see, to basically see everything that you're responsible. And then we have a set of integrations that pull from Amazon CloudWatch. And it looks like that line got broken somehow, but that ability to be able to see both your CloudWatch data and all of the application and operating system components that you're responsible for all in one place is very powerful. And where this really comes into play, and some of you may have hit this already, and some of you may get there soon, but if you think about your CloudWatch data and where you could put that, there are really two ways of looking at where you could put it. You could say, hey, I want to just see my CloudWatch data in a dashboard, and that's fine. You can go see that. But really what you want to do is understand the context of that data. And so one of the things that we see is if you put your CloudWatch data into a logging or a metrics platform, what you can do is see what's happening to that instance. So you might see, hey, we've got an instance that's running, CPUs at very high utilization rates. Why did that happen? Who knows? Well, with New Relic, you can see exactly why that happened. And that's something that's very easy to do today. And New Relic tomorrow, and actually more or less already today, we can not only give you a recommendation on the instance sizes and where your app should be running. But we can also help you manage that CloudWatch data so that you don't overpay for data that you don't need. So you can manage the frequency and polling, which is something that probably many of you haven't actually experienced as a thing yet, but trust me, it's there, and you'll thank me when you get to see that. So with that, I just want to kind of come back to, as you embark on your DevOps journeys, making sure that you can understand the impact of what you've changed, and then make sure that the team can see what's happened there. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to our friends at DraftKings, because they've used New Relic to instrument their front-end experience, and he's going to show you a few things about that and make sure that they understand how to resolve problems quickly, how to understand the impact of changes, and make sure that the team understands what to do next. So with that, let me turn this over.
Thank you so much, Abner. Hey guys, it's Mark D'Antonio here at DraftKings. Want to take a quick moment to introduce myself. So I've been here for about 3 years, and I originally came in to help lead the conversion from monolithic architecture to microservices. And I originally came in to help grow the daily fantasy apps, so iOS, Android, and web. Before that, I had spent about 5 years with WB Games, specifically in the Boston office, Turbine, working on some pretty cool AAA titles. Hopefully, some of you guys have played them. I think my coolest memory as a part of DraftKings was getting a chance to live through 2015 when daily fantasy commercials dominated everything. Takeovers to subways, airports, train stations, and just everywhere on the commercial airwaves. And allowed us to go through some really interesting technology and scaling challenges on the back end that was great to live through. More recently, I'm heading up new initiatives in the media space here, and growing an application called DraftKings Live, which is our live scoring application. So if you haven't downloaded it, go check it out. It's pretty cool. We have a big vision for the role that we play in our users' lives. We want you to get more out of the fan experience, and we believe that life is more fun when you have skin in the game. This is a talk about DevOps, so let's talk a little bit about what we're made of. So I think the important thing here is that you need to understand that the teams here own the full life cycle for their development. So we have multiple teams doing that in concert, which adds a lot of different complexity to how we operate. So we make heavy use of Amazon Web Services. The teams themselves own that build, deploy, scaling aspect of their software using things like Terraform and CloudFormation templates, Chef, and Octo. And it also means that the teams are responsible for monitoring. So they use PagerDuty, and they're responsible for making sure that they understand how the software is operating out there in the wild. So we do use make heavy use of Insights dashboards and New Relic alerts, and we have used a couple other tools in addition, including Amazon CloudWatch to do that. So New Relic helps us drive a common understanding of the metrics that we need to align, to execute, and to improve our software. So I had started using New Relic back when I was with Warner Brothers, and when I came over, there was a real need for us to be able to understand JavaScript and client visibility on the web. So we started using New Relic here at DraftKings with the browser product, and then quickly grew into the mobile product around this brand new Android application for daily fantasy that we were bringing to market. As noted, also use synthetics. And what's really important there is being able to know the difference between the issues with the internet, making sure that we know where that hits the platform, and then coming down from there. We also use a system called OKRs, those key results around performance profiling. Is in part driven by our New Relic monitors and metrics, and how the team continues to go back and report on those. And obviously the insights dashboards. We don't launch software generally without something there for the war room, so be able to aggregate and drill down into specifics in real time. And I'll show you an example of that later in the talk. So I think it's good for people to understand at a high level how we develop software and what that product lifecycle looks like. So this is the general playbook for how we approach feature development. Important to note here, not going through every bit, but KPIs and experiments are discussed really early in that design and consensus building phase. Understanding how we're going to measure if this is successful, understanding how we bring the software to market. And a little bit later, we'll talk about some of the instruments that we use to do that. So I don't know how many of you guys know Martin Fowler. Martin Fowler, for me, was required reading growing up through the engineering ranks. He's a famous engineering leader, a public speaker. He's a blogger. He digs into trends and has just an incredible pulse on what's happening in the world. And then he digs into them and he shares them with you through a number of different means. So a couple articles here that are important to go through. One of the things that he did that made a big impression on my team was he broke down some of the different trends that people were working through around toggles. And as he is prone to do, improve the definitions of those. And he put them on this really interesting axis where along one side, there was longevity, which equated out to carrying costs, and then dynamicism, which is increased complexity in how these things are set. And we took these and personalized this into how we operate, and we'll go into each one of those. So release toggles, this is really about shipping code versus releasing code. And we believe here that unshipped inventory is risk. So we want to make sure that the teams are able to stay in a constant cadence, understand how to keep those good practices. So pulling feature branches, doing their pull requests, and staying in a good rhythm is important. And we allow them to do that with the release toggles, so they can continue to ship without the risk of these big bulky merge conflicts and other problems down. It also transitions really cleanly into our points of first contact with internal beta groups or permission toggles later on. Experiment toggles, I think it is what most people think about when they think about adding a toggle or a feature flag in their code base. One of the important learnings here that to take away is it's really important to be able to drive these things from a central place out to the client. So as you move more into a multi-platform and multi-application environment, you need to be able to quarterback that from a central spot. So for us, we have a service called Higgs. That's an experiment service that the clients can communicate back to. That for us, we use a lot for A/B testing. And it's really about which code path that we send users down based on different segments and cohorts assigned. Those toggles can last a variable amount of time. We'll talk about cleanup in a sec, but just recognize that those things can last hours, they can last days or weeks. So it really depends on how you're bringing that thing to market and how you achieve statistical significance. And just make sure that once you make this decision, both code paths need to be maintained. So just make sure that you're going in understanding the complexity there. So this is a slide about our first contact options. So we have two different options, and there are two different use cases here that make sense. So one of them, the beta group, this is our champagne brunch. We joke around about, instead of just saying we dog food our own software, we say it, we're drinking our own champagne. And this is about allowing people inside the company to be able to get first access to software, try it out, and then you can eventually grow that to external VIPs that can get early access. When I was working on MMOs, there's a public test realm or a set of servers that some of the more invested users can get into and be able to give you feedback. So it's a very targeted audience experience, but it's also manually intensive. So you're able to get really good qualitative feedback that you need to solicit from the individuals there, but it takes a lot of work to do it. The other option is a Canary cohort. So this is basically randomly assigning to a group of people this new experience, and then balancing how much of the traffic gets that versus a control group. It's also obviously very important to instrument that, make sure you monitor, report back on KPIs. And the benefit here is that that's automated and it's easy to spin up and spin down. Ops toggles, this is the good old-fashioned circuit breaker. So these are the pieces of the places in the software where you put some safeguards in place to make sure that if there are things that are more intensive, that have more demand, that you're able to segment that away. So if that goes down, the rest of the software is up and running. So a good example, this fall we launched our $1 billion lineup, and one of the things we wanted to do is take a step back through those user flows and make sure that if somebody is winning and we lit the internet on fire, that would be able to safely make sure that the experience was up for all people. So and these things can be very long-lived. Make sure that it's something that you plan around from a longevity in the code base. This is a slide that it goes into some of the things that we take into account on how things cascade down, how we set those different feature flags and permissions toggles. So the lesson here is you need to be able to allow people that need to configure a specific experience, perhaps for testing, a way to be able to get to that routinely and be able to set an expectation and then get that experience to be able to test that. So we start with URL parameters. So there's always a query string override that you can set. That sticks around in local storage. So the last thing you want to do is get down a code path and then come back and have that reset without you knowing because the URL parameter fell off. The Higgs experiment system that I talked about earlier allows us to toggle that from a central location out. And then there's at the lowest level, the most simplistic thing you can do is just a structured config file that's application specific that you can set some of the different feature toggles on. Carrying costs. So the last thing you want is your code to become a big spaghetti monster full of feature flags and toggles. That is a definite possibility if you're not careful. So make sure that you manage your inventory. There are a couple of different best practices you can use here. So different teams add a story to the backlog as soon as they add a toggle to clean that up. So you have that there in your product backlog. You can add dates to the toggle, so you don't actually need to hunt down how old it is. If some other developer looks at it, they don't need to sit there and try to reason out when the code was entered. You can also add soft warnings for toggles. So you add into your build system something that warns and says, hey, we have a couple of these things that are past expiration. We should go back and clean it up. You can legitimately fail builds based on agreed age, which is a little bit more extreme version of that. Or you could just apply a limit. So you only have so many that you can have in place. And once you exceed that, the team needs to group up and talk about there is a complexity issue at that point when you exceed that number that you feel like you can handle. So take the human approach, talk about it, and figure out the cleanup strategy. So I want to take you through a product launch example. This was an example we did a couple of years ago where we took an older sign-up page and we just wanted to clean it up into this nice new responsive view. Should be a no-brainer, right? It's going to convert better. Going into it, we wanted to make sure that we were keeping track of attempt rate, success rate, and error rate, so we weren't doing any harm. Just to show you that we play by our own rules, here's the launch strategy. This is the standard playbook that we go through. So we need to make sure that we're using an experiment system to be able to bring this to market, even though it should be a no-brainer and it's an easy change. And just define some of the things around the general launch strategy to make sure that we're keeping ourselves honest. And then we did it, right? And what ended up happening very early in that rollout, we found out that something was off. So why was the attempt rate only affected? It allowed us to see that because we were tracking those different KPIs. And about midday, we found the issue. So in the older version, we had a call to action that we had conditioned users to look for to be able to toggle the page over. In this version, it was not as present, and it was also in a different location. So the login button had moved to the bottom. We cleaned that up. We added the button back up into the area that users were conditioned to look for it, re-released the software, and bang, we were back to where we were supposed to be. So improved user experience, conversion, and KPIs were where they were supposed to be. So success for the project. So in summary, in terms of empowering a DevOps mentality for your team, you need to make sure that you have a process that empowers your teams and reinforces their autonomy. You need to make sure that you do that safely. So spend time understanding early in your process how you intend to release. Make sure you layer in toggles with experiments. Make sure there are ways to be able to stay in your build cadence. That's a really important aspect. And then bring that to market based on the understanding earlier in the consensus building. Drive experiments out from that central system. You don't want to have to release software to update those things. You want to be able to call back to something at home base and be able to drive those changes, especially if you need to shut those things off and tune them, which is something that happens frequently in this. Real overall lesson, real important bit here, performance culture demands a common understanding of the metrics. So you need to be instrumented and you need those things to be able to drive consensus, to be able to execute and then improve. And all of this happens in an iterative manner in an agile shop. You don't need to fly blind doing that. So you need great metrics. You need great tools. AWS with CloudWatch and New Relic provide those tools for us. Take a lesson from us and look into those. And if you haven't tried out DraftKings or haven't played, perhaps Showdown Golf for the Masters last week, like millions of people did, try it. It's a great fun game, awesome opportunity to get more involved with the sport that you love.
All right, thanks so much, Mark. And I think we can go ahead and transition on over to our Q&A. Is that all you had, Mark? Are we ready to take some questions?
That's everything from us.
Great. Not to minimize what you said. Actually, a really great story because you actually walked through a lot of things that a lot of the details. And I love hearing stories like this because you walk through the details of what your everyday product launches and things like that look like, and it really helps. At least for me, and I know some of the customers I've spoken to, helps to conceptualize how this actually works. Not just, oh, we're using DevOps, but you're actually showing how it's working real time in your company. And I love hearing stories like this. So thanks so much. And we're just going to go ahead and take a few questions from the audience here. So let's go ahead and start off with, this is a question for you, Abner. For infrastructure monitoring, CloudWatch metrics are already there via default of custom monitoring. What is the value of New Relic adding for infrastructure monitoring?
Sure. So there are a few different pieces of value. One is if you have on-prem environments and cloud environments, being able to see all of that in the same place is valuable. The other thing is the ability to understand changes. So one of the things that's unique about New Relic's infrastructure monitoring is that it serves a lot of the sort of classic infrastructure monitoring that you might see things like memory and IO and network throughput and that sort of thing. But also every change that's happened to every file in the system and every config change. So that could be a auto scaling event. It could be somebody SSHing into a server and making a change. Any of those changes are things that we capture. And so that's above and beyond what you get in CloudWatch. The other thing that we would do is if you have a global environment, CloudWatch today generally is region by region. And so we would consolidate all of those regions into a common view. So those are a couple things that that are sort of above and beyond. But if you think about, generally any config change or piece of the environment that you're responsible for, those are the pieces that we monitor in New Relic infrastructure. So things like containers and Kubernetes and stuff like that.
Perfect. And just another question, it looks like, to kind of build on that is how does New Relic help fix application performance problems in real time?
Sure. So step one is instrumenting the application in the first place. So when we embed or when your teams embed our agent into their applications, we see every method call, we see external calls from the service to other services, and we capture all of that data and put it into dashboards so that you can see what's happening on a minute-by-minute basis. Infrastructure, by the way, is every 5 seconds, not every minute. But the ability to see that, see what's happening, see those spikes in real time. One good example of that is Airbnb. When they bought a Super Bowl ad, they wanted to understand the performance of their site in the following minutes after the ad ran, and actually in the following 24 to 72 hours. And so, but those first couple minutes were pretty critical because they wanted to understand and make sure that the site was performing well. And so that ability to be able to match the scale of those big spikes. Other good examples are things like Black Friday and those sorts of places where historically, you don't want to be worried about simultaneously scaling your app and scaling your monitoring infrastructure. Will take all that load, no problem. So step one is that instrumentation. Step two is ingesting the data and giving it to you in nicely curated dashboards, so that you can see everything from what those spikes are to all the various components inside the systems, whether it's database calls or external services, cloud services, all those pieces.
Great, thanks. I've got another question. I think, Mark, I'm going to hand this one to you. It's a little bit of New Relic type stuff, but it's really more about your login button. How did you get the graph metrics to realize that you needed the login button back in the top right-hand corner, and how were you able to overlay the graphs before and after?
So we use Insights dashboards. So we use a piece of software called Segment that is an events manager, and we instrument things through that to New Relic events and then also into the data warehouse. So we were using Insights dashboards that we set up for the launch to be able to watch specific conversions. And then when we needed to dig down a little bit deeper and get that over a stretch of time, we actually will plumb that back out of the system through different NRQL queries to be able to put the visuals together.
How about, what is the license model for New Relic?
That's a great question. So we have two different license models. One is host-based. And so basically the size of your compute footprint on a per month basis is how we charge for APM and infrastructure. And so if you just want infrastructure monitoring, we're extremely competitive there. If you want infrastructure plus application monitoring, that's based on your compute footprint. If you want front-end monitoring, that's based on the amount of activity that occurs inside your mobile apps or web apps. So so we charge based on how much you have there. And I think the important thing today is that our pricing models are based on essentially a pay forward. So it's not a usage-based pricing, so you don't get a surprise at the end of the month. And then, as your infrastructure grows, we can very easily grow with you. The other model that we have today is our cloud-based pricing. So this is basically, if you have one really large server and you want to break that really large server into 10 small instances, our view is that you should pay roughly the same amount for that, and we shouldn't penalize you. You shouldn't be making architectural decisions based on your monitoring licensing. And then for services like Fargate and some of those, come and talk to us, and we'll get you set up. So we have evolved our pricing models as our customers' architectures and systems have changed, and continue to really look at that. Our basic view is we want to make sure that you're successful, and that we align our pricing models to the architectures and services that you're using.
There's another question here that kind of tacks onto that one, and I think it really falls more along the lines of our migration programs. But a question about AWS paying credits to use New Relic in the beginning. So I'm assuming like things like CloudWatch and things like that. And I know we've got some great migration programs, and New Relic is actually one of our migration partners. So Abner, if you could talk a little bit about the credits that are available there with using New Relic, if for your customers who are using trial or things like that.
Yeah. So we have a variety of different trials that you can use. We are part of Amazon's migration acceleration program. So if you're part of that program, we have some unique offers that are aligned with the Amazon credits in that. So definitely talk to us about how to align with that. And oftentimes there's sort of the trial piece, but more importantly, there's the what should you measure and how should you go about measuring a migration to make it successful. So we've built out a number of different assets around that. My favorite one is called Measure Twice, Cut Once. So you can go grab that doc. We did a webinar with the AWS Migration Acceleration Program lead back in November. So that's another great resource. But we offer we're super flexible. We want you to be successful, and we're willing to create pricing models and term structures that make your migration successful. So one of the things that a lot of people don't really know when they're going into a migration scenario is they don't know how much monitoring they're going to need, especially as they break apart their services from monoliths to microservices and that sort of thing. And so that's one of the beauties of going with a SaaS service like New Relic, is that we can be super flexible, we can scale with you, and we can provide terms that make sense for your environment.
Okay, and then just a further refining of the question, and I can address this one, is does AWS pay any credits? There are programs in our partner program, as we were talking about the migration acceleration program. There's a few different programs that we have, and depending on where your company falls within those. Within any one of those programs, there are some credits available. So the best thing to do would be to, if you have a solutions architect or or in a representative that you're working with, it would be best to talk to them and specifically address your environment and see how you can see if you do qualify for any of those credits. But to answer your specific question, there are credits available depending on which program you fall under. I think we've got time for one more question, and I think since we don't have Mark, we'll just go ahead and have Abner will have you address the next one, and that is, will you be covering some training on information provided by New Relic in this webinar? So I'm not sure how you want to take that, but maybe we can provide some links or
Yeah, so we can provide some links. The other thing I would say is we have a program called the Well Instrumented Tour. So if you're anywhere near an AWS summit out in the world, there's a pretty good chance that we are offering training either the day before or the day after those summits all over the world. So if you go look up the Well Instrumented Tour, or if you want an invite to that in your city, let us know, and we'll make sure we get you hooked up with that training. It's an awesome resource. Everybody that comes out of that training is super happy. If that one doesn't work for you, there's also the New Relic University, which has a bunch of online videos and other tools that you can walk through to not only get trained, but also get certified.
Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap it up with that one. And just a reminder is that any unanswered questions that that we have here, we will be responding to. So, especially those from Mark, we're going to go ahead and pass those on to Mark and let him address those. So, you will get your answers. Just want to say thanks to everyone for attending today, and please stay connected and complete the brief survey at the end of the webinar. So, we do want to hear back from you. So we look forward to supporting you in current and future projects. And thanks again, and have a great day, everyone.